You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. How are the things meant to nourish us quietly reshaping our minds and bodies? Join me for today's provocative exploration. This episode contains adult subject matter and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. Many of us don't learn about the connection between our gut and overall well-being until symptoms start to interfere with daily life. In this episode, we explore how digestive health, mental health, and even environmental exposures can overlap in unexpected ways. What begins as a conversation about mood and microbiome quickly opens up into a deeper look at how chemicals in food and common triggers like wheat may impact the body's ability to regulate and repair. Evan Transue, aka Detective Ev, graduated from Functional Diagnostic Nutrition in 2017. Prior to finding FDN, he and his mom had suffered with a variety of health challenges for over a decade. These include, but aren't limited to, severe cystic acne, major depressive disorder, panic disorder, GERD, and Graves' disease. The FDN system transformed his and his mom's lives so profoundly that all of his work is now centered around spreading its teachings. Evan is now the host of the Health Detective Podcast, owner of Bucks County Light Therapy and Functional Medicine Center, and speaks professionally to middle and high school students about mental health challenges. He has been blessed to speak to over 50,000 students around the country and deliver over 500 professional presentations. Let's meet Evan Transue. Hi, Evan. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because connecting gut health and mental well-being are two pieces that I feel are so important in today's world. And I'm really glad you're here to talk about that. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm always really appreciative of any chance to share this because it's crazy, but I've been in this space now for 11 years, and the amount of resources that are coming out because of people like you that are starting these things and allowing these conversations, the information, it still needs to get to more people, but it is significantly more accessible than it was 11 years ago when I'm just like running around Barnes and Noble bookstores hoping for the best and trying to find something. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. And I feel like this is one of the ways, like you said, that we can actually diffuse this information. There are people like yourself that have this amazing lived experience and so much wisdom, and we need to get that into the hands and ears of people who are also going through those challenges and are sort of in a place where they don't know what to do with that. So thank you for coming on today, taking the time. And let's start with a little bit about yourself, Evan. And maybe you want to share the parts of your journey or your story that you feel connect to what we're talking about today. And also share with our listeners what it is that you do today so they can get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I'll try to do that as summarized as possible. It's a few minute answer for sure. So I didn't get into studying gut health and holistic health randomly. Most people don't. Most people get into this because they had a variety of health issues, whether it be physical, mental, or both. And then they realize just through process of elimination that they need to look into alternative stuff to be able to find something that works for them. But for me, I have what I call a pretty quote unquote traditional mental health journey prior to finding out about the holistic stuff. And the reason I say traditional is because unfortunately, what happens with a lot of people with mental health is they don't get help. Things do get worse and they develop various negative coping mechanisms. So the super summarized version is that I actually started dealing, at least what I remember, first mental health symptoms I had were actually as young as 5 years old. And that was in the form of panic attacks. Now, for those that don't know what panic attacks are, I do encourage you to Google it. I'm not normally an advocate for Dr. Google because we shouldn't be replacing medicine or doctors with Google, but you can learn a lot from that. And I don't think it's inappropriate at all to look up what is a panic attack, because many people nowadays mistake stressful situations for being synonymous with panic attacks. And that's not the case. Panic attacks have a distinct set of symptoms. They suck. And one of these symptoms is actually a fear of impending doom, which is nearly impossible to describe how literal that is to someone who hasn't been through that. So when it says fear of impending doom, what that means as someone who's experiencing it is you actually believe something terrible is about to happen. You actually believe that you could die. And where this gets very troublesome is even if you get older, and I say older because you could say, well, you're 6, right? Of course, or 5. Of course, you're falling for this. But it doesn't matter how old you are. Even if you're older and dealing with this, and if you're dealing with it regularly, you will still convince yourself every single time that you have that panic attack that this is something that could possibly kill you, or that this is something that could harm you. And in a sense, it's such a stressful situation and your heart's going so fast, your adrenaline's pumping. I would assume the older that you get, there probably is a real risk with it. You could have a heart attack or something else because you're under so much stress. That started as young as 5 years old. My parents and myself did not have a label for what that meant. I'm 29 now. So imagine we're going back 24 years. And I just want everyone to think about how far we've come with mental health awareness just in the last 5 years. That was one of the only good things about COVID, is we seem to become much more aware about mental health and open to talking about it. So go back another 20 years, even if people cared about it, they didn't necessarily know about it in the same way that we do now. I would still argue that many people don't know about these things in the way that some of us at least do now. So when I had these first symptoms, it was kind of like, okay, what the heck's that? My parents are great people. They love me, but what the heck's that? Do we do anything about this? Panic attacks are also very short-lived. They could be 10 to 20 minutes. So it took it happening a few times before we actually did something about this. And what happened that was very sad, actually, is we went to a doctor. And the doctor told my parents and myself, it's one of the only other things I remember from 5 years old, is I remember these occasional panic attacks, and I remember going to this doctor's office. And he said to my parents, this isn't something to worry about. Evan just gets himself a little too worked up, and he's going to outgrow this. Now, people always assume that because I'm in the natural space, I must be anti-Western. That's not what I'm saying, nor am I anti that doctor. That doctor meant well. I still know that person today. But just how, in the same way that the stigma around mental health affects people like you and I, and it's gotten better over the last 5 years, folks, that same stigma affects medical professionals. They might be more aware of these challenges, but they still have this thing in their head. Okay, what is the probability that a 5-year-old with 2 parents who love each other, there's no abuse in the family, is coming into my office with panic attacks? That probability is extremely low. So they are at least publicly. So they're doing the best that they can and saying that this is something I'm going to outgrow. It wasn't something that I outgrew. And my young-minded logic for this was, the worse that I got, the more I solidified the idea that I can't talk about these things. And for those that doesn't make sense to, you're like, well, wait a second, why would you not talk about these things if you're getting worse? It's because I kept remembering this doctor saying, you're going to outgrow this, or he's going to outgrow this, right? He's talking to my parents, but I'm in the room, and this is going to be okay. Now, the reason that that was an issue is because we do this as adults, let alone as kids. Doctors are authority figures. You pick up these things as kids. You know that they make more money than my parents. I know that they're probably smarter than my parents and me. They are an authority figure. We are going to them to figure out things that my mom and dad can't figure out. They must be an authority figure. So when they said anything to me, I took that as very literal, and I didn't realize that these people could be flawed. I had no idea that the third leading cause of death in America is medical malpractice. So that's mistakes made by people. Medical malpractice is the wrong way to word that. That is not the correct word. I'm sorry. Let's say medical mistakes. That's actually the third leading cause of death in America. So it's not be scared of Western medicine, but understand that it is ran by human beings who are fallible, just like you and I. With that said, when he said that, the worst that I got, I kept thinking, well, this doctor couldn't figure this out. He said, I'm going to outgrow this. It must be me. And I started to develop language that had nothing to do with mental health. I didn't know what a panic attack was. I didn't know what depression was. I knew what crazy was, and I figured I must be crazy. Because guys, again, the reason I talk about going back 24 years, we weren't talking about this in school. I don't know if it might be different in certain places in Europe. I know some of them are much better with the awareness around these types of things, but I would imagine 24 years ago, we were all pretty much in the same playing field. We didn't learn about mental health in school, and I went to a good school. So the worse that I got, the more that I assumed I was crazy. I promised I'd keep this summarized. So what happened is, as I got into my teenage years, so I almost made it 9 or 10 years dealing with this stuff on and off, the symptoms were not random at that point. They weren't every now and then. They weren't once a week or once a month. They were every day. And I now know I developed multiple conditions at the same time. So there was a point I was dealing with panic disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and major depressive disorder. And for those unfamiliar, it's not even that rare to necessarily have all those together. Some of them are actually risk factors for the other one. For example, anxiety disorders are risk factors for major depressive disorder. Go figure. And when depression hit, I would almost argue that that was worse than the panic attacks, because at least the panic attacks went away at some point. Depression was kind of this constant fog, and it changed who I was as a person. And since it was so constant, I needed some relief, but I didn't go to the places I should have went for that, like the doctors. I turned to drugs. And that started about a 3-year span of abusing drugs and alcohol, but mostly alcohol is technically a drug, but you know what I mean when I say drugs versus alcohol. It was mostly the illegal drug side. And what occurred at 18 is what got me into this holistic health stuff. I made it 17 days into my senior year of high school, so my last year of high school. And I think what happened is we have about 2.5 months off for summer here between school years in America. Whenever I had more time, I got worse. I was more isolated and I would do more drugs. I was coming off summer and I feel like I got so bad at that point with the drugs, I couldn't reintegrate into school. And 17 days in, I got kicked out. I was arrested. I actually went to a juvenile detention facility here, and it completely shattered my life. I didn't know how to handle that. And I actually turned to drugs even while on probation, I was getting drug tested and I'm still doing these things. So if that doesn't show you how delusional I was at the time, I don't know what will. I only knew one coping mechanism for stress, and that was drugs. And I was under the most stress I'd ever been under. I had a pretty profound moment with someone that I had been dating in high school. They had enough of my crap at one point. And I don't mean this to say that they weren't supportive. It's actually the exact opposite. I was so unwilling to help myself for years, but this person had my back for years. But the relationship became so toxic because I was unwilling to get help that they finally left. And as sad as it was, I almost thank God for it, because that's what snapped me out of it, believe it or not. Of all things, it was her leaving my life that kind of snapped me out of it long enough to realize that the path that I was currently on, whether it was my fault completely or not, that doesn't even matter. But whether it was my fault or not, the path that I was currently on, doing drugs while on probation, one path is I'm going to die. The other path is I'm going to go to jail. It's only a matter of time before one of those happens. I don't know about you. I wasn't thrilled about either of those. So I got my life on track and I said that I need to change stuff. I didn't know what I needed to change or what that meant, but I knew I needed to get to the bottom of this. And Paulo Coelho has an awesome book called The Alchemist. And he says something along the lines of, when you make a powerful decision or an intentional decision, the whole universe or God conspires to make it happen. I don't know if that's true, but it sure seemed to be true for me, because when I made that decision, it only took 3 months before I met someone that got me involved with a group of young people who were into personal development, goal setting, reading books, gosh forbid, right? What a concept. So in a total of 6 months, I went from kicked out, arrested, on drugs to reading personal development books, setting goals, and saying I'm going to do something with my life. It was a wild transformation. And finally, thank you for listening to all this. It was within that personal development side that I started focusing on my health, because anyone that's in personal development will tell you that you need to take care of your health too. And when I started doing the basic habits that they recommended, trying to eat well, take a dang vitamin or something like that, I noticed that my mental health issues started to get better. That's all I needed. As they started to get better, that started this now 11-year journey where I just kept reading, studying, taking courses, doing all this stuff. And I'm very happy to say, and we'll get into the specifics soon, I'm sure, but I'm very happy to say that for the last 6 or 7 years now, I have not met the diagnostic criteria of any of these mental health conditions. If I went to a doctor and talked about this stuff, I do not meet the diagnostic criteria anymore. So it took several years, as you can tell, because I said I've been in this space for 11. That's a full 4 or 5 years before I really got this stuff under control. But I figured some things out now that I believe are happening in today's world, or I know that are happening in today's world. And that's primarily what I'm here to share. So believe it or not, that is the summarized version. Thanks for letting me share it.
Thank you so much, Evan, for sharing that. And I think this was a really good and open and honest look into what happens to so many of us when we are struggling with mental health challenges is we can't find the support or the right support at the right time, or even a person who can point us in the right direction. So many of us fall through the cracks when it comes to mental health. And of course, there are ways we turn to after, and they're not always healthy and not always productive, to try and cope with the things we don't want to feel and the things that we don't want to deal with or can't deal with in the capacity that we have at that time. I mean, thinking of a 5-year-old child having panic attacks, there just, I think, is not that capacity yet to rationalize what is happening to help yourself. Unfortunately, you touch on a big issue where I feel a lot of mental health challenges go unsupported. And I'm glad you're here to share some of the things that you actually found, because there comes a point when I think advocating for your own health is one of the ways forward that are going to be the most productive and probably the most helpful in the situation that we're in. So I'm glad to hear that you found that and you no longer meet any of the criteria. That's a really, really amazing thing. And it also tells me that there is a lot of hope and that actually we can help ourselves and we can come on this path of healing, no matter what has happened to us. In the same, when you're talking about substance abuse and finding ways to cope, many of us go down those roads and we try all sorts of things, but we can find healing. As you said, it just takes that right connection at the right time, that right path that fits for our healing for that to happen. So I'm very curious to find out more about what it is that you actually found, because of course, lifestyle, health, personal development, I feel like all of these pieces kind of go into mental health in some piece, but I think you found some parts that were more helpful to you than others.
Yes. One thing I'll get out of the way immediately is I did use a counselor, and that was helpful. That definitely did not get me to 100%. I don't even know if counselors are always forever for everyone. I have no idea. I'm not a doctor or a counselor, but that was useful for me. I needed to sort out some of the things that I had experienced. I needed to find out that I wasn't crazy. A counselor can't diagnose, but they can obviously give you insights. And as I was talking about the things that I thought made me crazy to this counselor, they would pause and stop me and say, well, that sounds a lot like depression. And when I would talk about other things that I thought made me crazy, well, wait, 1 second, I feel like I'm going to die. And the next second, I'm fine. I'm tired, but I'm fine. They're like, well, that sounds like a panic attack. So as I looked into this further, the counselor was actually the reason that I was able to go to doctors and learn that, okay, these are the things that I actually have. And not that that's fun. No one wants to get a bunch of labels thrown at them, but it's certainly better than the label of crazy. So that's one thing that's not necessarily what we're getting at today, but that was important and I need to mention it. So the natural stuff. The first thing that I technically did was take a high potency multivitamin. I'm not here to sell a multivitamin. I don't have any recommendations for you guys because it's different for everyone. Females and males alone might need different multivitamins. But I started to take this high potency multivitamin, and that was one of the things, in addition to some dietary changes, that I started to notice improvements in my mental health. And I'm sure I used much less complicated wording at the time, but I had this thought in my head. I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was something along the lines of, can nutraceuticals, again, I wouldn't have known that word, but can nutraceuticals affect our mental health? Because I'm feeling better. I just treated myself like an experiment. I was like a scientist. I stopped using the multivitamin. And then I felt pretty good for like a month. So I'm like, okay, it can't be that. But then month 2 came along, and sure enough, I started to feel that depression creep in and some of the stuff. So I was like, oh, this is fascinating. When I use this thing, I don't get 100% better, but I seem to get somewhat better. Now, does this make sense? Is there any other things or any other instances where you can see people dealing with this? Yes. And this actually connects to my story. So you guys might be familiar with celiac disease. For those that aren't, celiac disease is one of the most common autoimmune conditions. And for people with celiac disease, when they eat gluten, it directly attacks, not the gluten itself, I'm sorry, but it triggers an immune response in the body that directly attacks the small intestine. So what happens to these people is the small intestine, look up like leaky gut on Google Images and you guys can see an idea of this. You'll know what I mean when you look it up, but it's almost like a little tube and then there's these hair-like things on it. That's an animated version, of course, but those hair-like things are your microvilli. What those microvilli do is, as supposedly and hopefully mostly digested food proteins are going through that small intestine, that's further assimilating the nutrients from it, those microvilli. When you have celiac and the small intestine's getting attacked, what happens is the microvilli breaks down, so you stop assimilating the nutrients as well. And there's these cells, the outer cell layer, the epithelial cell layer of the small intestine. When those are tight and connected, you're healthy and things can't get through to the bloodstream. But when you're unhealthy, I'm sure you guys have heard of this, leaky gut. It's technically known as intestinal permeability. That's another thing that happens to people with celiac disease. Those cells that are normally tight together, they split apart. So now what occurs is you get these undigested food proteins going through your small intestine. You don't break down the nutrients properly from them. And worse yet, the food proteins go directly into your bloodstream and your body correctly says, this isn't supposed to be here. Now, what it incorrectly does is says, oh, it isn't supposed to be here. We need to attack this. So this is how a lot of people with celiac develop other food sensitivities. The body's correct that that shouldn't be there. It doesn't need to create an immune response to a food protein, an avocado or something, but that can happen when you have this intestinal permeability or leaky gut. So the reason I mentioned celiac is because people with celiac disease, if anyone is listening and happens to have this condition or knows someone with the condition, you know that almost universally, people don't get diagnosed with celiac first. They get diagnosed with something else first. And a lot of the times, not all the time, but a lot of the times it can be mental health related. And you say, well, what the heck does mental health have to do with celiac disease? Well, what happens to an individual if I take away their ability to get the proper amount of protein? Oh, I can't create neurotransmitters now because serotonin, dopamine, all these precursors for these neurotransmitters come from amino acids. And what else helps contribute to them is vitamins, micronutrients. Now I can't get the proper amount of micronutrients. I can't get the proper amount of macronutrients. And then on top of it, let's be dead honest, unless you know that you're sick, you're probably eating very poorly. You're probably eating like most of us in Western society. We don't eat well. Even if Europe, generally speaking, is a step ahead, we still don't eat well. Now we're eating terribly. We're not even digesting the terrible food that we're eating. And you can manifest as mental health symptoms. Where does that connect for me? Where does this connect for all the gut stuff? Because you might say, well, I don't have celiac, so what does this even matter? You might not have celiac, but a lot of people, like a ton of people, I would say about 40% of the people that I've tested at least have something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, NCGS, non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So that means you do not have celiac disease because every time you eat gluten, there's not a direct immune response to the small intestine, but you have an immune response to gluten. And ironically, I don't want to get too complicated here. I hope this is okay. Ironically, when you are eating gluten, it creates the release of something called zonulin. And zonulin, when it's super high, guess what it does? It spreads apart the tight junctions, those cells. It's not the same as celiac, but effectively, if you have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, you can get very similar issues given enough time. I had all these mental health issues. I had severe cystic acne. I had other like physical health issues that we're not going to talk about today necessarily. And I had an undiagnosed non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And guess what? I was a standard American. I was skinny too, so I thought I could eat whatever I wanted. So I would have cereal for breakfast. I would have a sandwich for lunch. I'd have pasta or something similar for dinner. And, you know, you're having like cookies or cake as a snack or dessert or whatever it might be. So not only was I eating gluten, I told my body that we're going to eat gluten all day, every day. It turns out as well that my mom, because this can be genetic, she also has a non-celiac gluten sensitivity. My mom was sick as could be, because she was much older than me, obviously, when we found this out. So she had been eating gluten for years. And when we removed this from her diet, she literally says she believes that this saved her life by removing this from her diet. For me, it definitely saved my life, or at least it changed it, that's for sure. So am I saying everyone has a gluten thing? No, I'm saying that most of us are experiencing some variation of that, where our guts are being damaged so strongly by what we're doing in today's world that we're not assimilating nutrients, whether it be micronutrients or macronutrients or both. And it's manifesting in some people as mental health symptoms as a result. So even if it's not gluten for you, if you're listening to this and you're in the United States, you 100% chance you are exposed to glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. I believe France has that as well. It's just not as much. Some countries in Europe have it completely banned. USA is the worst country in the world for this. Glyphosate, it gets into all of our produce. Even if you have organic food, the problem with glyphosate is it goes up into the rainwater. So we've used it so much now that your clouds, the clouds that are producing the rain, have glyphosate. I could be on my organic farm, but because 2 miles away, there's some dude that uses conventional farming and uses glyphosate. Now that gets into my stuff. So there is no such thing as organic in the United States. You just get better than the worst stuff. There's no such thing as organic. You just get better than the worst stuff. Every single person that's in the United States that's listening to this is exposed to glyphosate. Guess what glyphosate does? Spreads the tight junctions apart. That's not my opinion. That's something that you can look up right now, and you can find it in scientific research. You can find it on PubMed. I just told you that intestinal permeability or a leaky gut can cause mental health issues. It can cause a variety of other health issues, by the way, too. We won't even get into that today. But it definitely can cause mental health issues. And every single person that is listening to this, that is in the United States, and many of the people that are listening to this in Europe, are exposed to glyphosate. And glyphosate always increases leaky gut and intestinal permeability. So we wonder why we're so sick. It's because we're putting stuff into the environment and into our bodies that is meant to kill things. It's insane. I'll pause there again, but you can only do so much in a podcast. What I really try to do is plant seeds, and this is not medical advice. You can't take medical advice from me, even if I was a doctor. That's not appropriate on a podcast. It's not even legal. But I can plant seeds to get you thinking and to get you looking in the right direction. If we have time, there's some other things that we can go into about gut health. But just that alone, if people just listen to what I just said and practice maybe a little bit of gluten-free for a while, and we're conscious about what chemicals are being put into their food, that alone could help people tremendously. And again, if we have time, I can get into some more stuff too.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Evan, and how eye-opening, and scary at the same time, because it feels like we can't even get away from it without cutting out. And I'm a bread-loving European, so you can see how difficult that is for me to hear. And does this only affect the actual cereal pieces of what we eat, or because it's in the rain, it also then comes on other vegetables and fruits? Or does that solely affect really when we talk about gluten with these chemicals?
The reason I'm connected gluten and glyphosate, that's a very good question. This is going to sound insane. You're like, how is this even legal? This is what we do. The United States, and I love our country. I'm actually someone who very much loves the United States for a variety of reasons, but I'm also not one of those people from the USA that is so unobjective that I think we have nothing to work on. I think that's equally as stupid. One of the things that we are the best at is screwing up food and just doing insane stuff. What they do here is they'll take wheat before it's fully ready, and they'll spray it with glyphosate. They spray the wheat with glyphosate, and they do this as a part of the harvesting. I actually believe that this is probably a large reason that people have non-celiac gluten sensitivities. I believe that we're reacting to the glyphosate initially. This is not anti-vax stuff. This is actually true. This is a known fact. And again, please look it up if people aren't aware of this. Some vaccines, childhood vaccines, have egg proteins in them. When you give the vaccine to the kid, some of them develop egg allergies and egg sensitivities. Why? It's because you injected it with a bunch of other stuff that the body, of course, is going to react to. So if I give someone a measles vaccine, the whole point is to create immune response. That's how a vaccine works. You want an immune response to be created. It turns out if I put a bunch of other ingredients in and then inject the same type of disease, some people will start to develop immune responses to those other things because the body's just like, all of this bad stuff came in at once. I'm going to attack all of it. I believe that a lot of us are actually reacting immunologically to glyphosate. And because it's so overused in wheat, that's why so many of us have these non-celiac gluten sensitivities. An easy way to stay away from glyphosate as much as possible, and this is very sad that we even have to think this way, but it's like, I wouldn't be running around in rainwater a lot because it does go through your skin. And what's good, I just looked this up, by the way. So this was politico.eu. It said Macron, is that a leader? Macron, does that mean anything?
Yeah, that's the French president at the moment.
Okay. Sorry that I don't know that, but the 2017 announcement was that France would ban the use of glyphosate within 3 years, and that pitted him against powerful agricultural interests, it says. And this was posted in 2023, so I don't have the time to read this fully, obviously, live, but It looks like you guys are working on it, but there are some powers, these agricultural companies, that don't want this to go away because it's very profitable. One of the ways to avoid it is, if you are able to, animal proteins won't carry as much of this kind of stuff. The things that are going to carry it the most are starches and our veggies. Now, I'm not carnivore either. Listen, I'm just out to help people with health. I don't have dogma around veganism, carnivore. I just want people to be healthy. That's all I want. And all I can ever do with that is share what helped me and helped people that I've worked with or talked to. If you are able to eat a little bit more animal protein, you are probably going to lessen your exposure. Yes, it is still a good idea to eat organic more often than not. If you know where this stuff is grown, even better. So those are all things that can help limit exposure. And with enough time, you can lower the exposure in your body. There's also urine tests that you can do, by the way, to see how much glyphosate that you have. Before anyone goes and makes any changes, I would highly recommend order one of these urine tests for glyphosate, see how much glyphosate you have in your body, then make the changes and see if you're actually getting yourself to a lower and lower number. That would be really cool. So those would be some ways to do it. I know it's hard when I worded it the way that I did to not create fear, but that's not the idea. I want to create awareness. So the best things that you can do is vote with your dollars. What does voting with your dollars means? That means refusing to buy things that you know were at least directly sprayed or grown with glyphosate. That's a great way to start. When I looked at this political thing, right, and you see that the agricultural companies and interests are fighting against this guy when he was trying to do that, I'm not saying that what they're doing is not wrong, but you can get them to start behaving better. And how you get them to start behaving better is saying, we are not buying your stuff. If we stop buying their stuff, I guarantee you they're going to change. Now, did they change for the right reasons? No. You could say that they didn't change for moral reasons at all. They just cared about money in their pocket. And that sucks. That's not fair. But the bottom line is we can get them to change, and that's how. Sorry, I know that kind of answered a couple of different questions, but the reality is we can't avoid it. I don't think we should be overly fearful. I think we need to take educated action and use some of the resources that we have in today's world to help us out. And I think we need to vote with our dollars and tell as many people as possible. Tell people what this stuff does. Tell people what's happening. Here's the thing, right? If people knew, they would never buy this crap. They would never use it. People don't know. That's the problem. So we can educate people too, and that allows them to vote with their dollars, and we can turn this whole thing around pretty quick. And it might be advisable to do that because this stuff lasts in the soil for a while. So even if we snapped our fingers and it all went away tomorrow, the production of it went away tomorrow, we still have some work to do. So it'd be a good idea to educate as many people as possible.
Yeah, and you raise a good point there, because we're seeing at the same time as this is happening, of course, mental health crisis across the world. We are seeing chronic illness crisis. We're seeing a stress crisis. And of course, I wouldn't be surprised if there are links in all of these pieces, and our declining global health in comparison to all of these chemicals being used in our foods and us being exposed to all of that when we eat that, of course. So a very interesting look inside sort of how that works. And yes, I feel like there is a pushback on many things that would be healthy for us because they're not profitable, so they don't happen. And of course, our food is not the only place this happens in, but awareness can help us shift those things and actually make informed and educated choices on that. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm wondering a little bit, the food piece and the gut piece, I think it's a huge part of mental health. And I think we now also have enough research to say that the gut actually has an intelligence on its own. It has, I think, neural networks as well, and is very tuned into the brain as far as messages being sent back and forth. So I think we know and have established now that the gut is part of mental health, and that we need to include that if we want to affect some kind of healing or getting better. What can we do then, in addition to avoiding our cereals and the wheat and gluten and those kind of things? Anything else that you found that really helped you move forward and put the pieces together on this journey for yourself?
Yeah, thank you. This will be a nice little fun bonus because it's not what you might think. So studying circadian biology was one of the best things that I did. And even if that sounds complicated, the action steps are actually very simple. There's two problems with today's world at the simplest level. One is that we have more stress than ever before. And people will say, well, what about 3,000 years ago? Didn't those people have a lot of stress? Certainly. And some groups had way more stress than others, no doubt about it. But stress is not just mental, emotional. Stress means toxins, stress means chemicals. And when you bombard human beings with a bunch of types of stress at once, it creates chronic issues in the body. Now, we're obviously resilient people. Otherwise, you and I could never be here, which is kind of interesting too, because if you think about it, we're kind of vulnerable and fragile. Think about for the first 10 years that you're here, at least, we're kind of helpless to some degree without our parents or some guardian, right? I would say for me, I matured a little bit later. I was probably helpless until like the age of 18, which is not good. So we have this very long period where we're kind of helpless. So clearly we are somewhat resilient to stress. Otherwise, we never would have made it this far to have 7 billion people on this world and be having conversations like we are now. So one piece is that there's more stress than ever before. How does this relate to circadian biology, though? The second piece. We're resilient to stress. Why? It's because we can recover. So just like all the other animals out there, we have to sleep. And when you are recovering, when you're sleeping, that's when you're doing your deepest recovery. So anyone who's into fitness, I'm not like a huge guy, but I do weightlifting for strength. I do kickboxing. I don't get better at kickboxing while I'm actually training. What I do is I set the stage to get better. And then what happens is I go to bed, and assuming I got enough deep sleep, my muscles will recover and be stronger next time. And assuming I got enough REM sleep, and I'm oversimplifying this for anyone that knows more about sleep than the average person. I'm oversimplifying it on purpose. But if I got enough REM sleep, then I'm going to remember the muscle memory. So that's why the first time I was doing boxing and I threw a right hook, it looks really awkward. But every time I practice 1, 2, over and over and over again, if I sleep, my body says, we need to do that. We need to learn that. This is the flip side. We have more stress than ever before. And then number 2, like I said, we've taken away our ability to recover. So if sleep is when we get the recovery, I think anyone that is listening to this would acknowledge that our sleep is not great. We're all on phones until the last second that we go to bed, or a computer or a tablet. Many of us have very stressful jobs and careers because times get tough. We're working more than we have. We're waking up to alarms that spikes your cortisol in a terrible way. If you have a population and a generation that's more exposed to toxins than ever before, more exposed to stress than ever before, and then simultaneously you take away their ability, their natural God-given ability to recover from the stress, which is sleep, it's rest. If you take that away or make it very weak, that's why we're seeing people that are so sick. So what are some action steps that we can do? I like to think about, how can I reduce stress as much as possible? You could do that through therapy. You could do that through functional lab testing. You could do that through eating better. You could do that through being aware of the glyphosate stuff we just talked about and trying to avoid that. There's a million ways to reduce stress. But then at the same time, how can I make myself a recovery machine? How can I make myself a human being that is optimizing for recovery? Well, we are made to go to bed when it's dark, and we're made to wake up when it's light. What a concept. So what I mean by that, though, is it's like, it shouldn't be that profound, but it is. So many people are going to bed at 1 a.m. That's not natural. The times that we know for most human beings, there's a very small exception for some, but for most human beings, the time that they go to bed should be anywhere from about 9 p.m. till 10:30 p.m. And they should be waking up anywhere between 5 to 6. And if they are getting their 8 hours during that window in particular, that is when your body is this super efficient machine. Now, there's a really interesting genetic thing that some people have. It's less than 1% of the population, but they can get away with 5 or 6 hours of sleep, and they show no signs of impairment. They show full signs of recovery. It's really interesting. And I won't even bring up names because no matter which side I bring up, someone won't like it. A lot of big politicians and a lot of billionaires actually have this genetic trait. So they have super high energy, and you hear about them not sleeping as much. It's literally a genetic thing. So it's really interesting. Most of us don't have that. I certainly don't have that. So we need to sleep. This means a couple things that we can do. Every single morning, you want to expose your body to natural light. This is becoming very popular now. A lot of people are talking about this on huge podcasts. If you're not doing it yet, you need to catch up, because if it's being talked about on huge podcasts, that means it really does have validity, right? So some of the best scientists are talking about this. You need to go out there and catch the natural light. I have prescription glasses on. I know you guys can't see me, but I would take these off if I was exposing my eyes to natural light, because I don't want anything to filter it. And yes, contacts and glasses, especially sunglasses, do filter some of that light. So I want to be getting as much natural light as possible. While I do this podcast today, of course, I have artificial lights on and I got the backdrop. So this is not natural whatsoever, but this is an hour of my day. I'm not doing this 7 days a week, 8 hours a day. That would kill me. But 1 hour every now and then, that's not a big deal. I'm going to take a light break, I call it, after this. That means I'll go outside and get some stuff. I had an hour meeting before I was on with you today. So actually in the 30 minutes before we did this podcast, I got outside again. I went outside and just sat there. I have a porch. So you could screw around on your phone outside for all I care. You could eat outside, whatever it is. But I spent some time out there. The most important part, and it stinks that they won't be able to see this. Maybe we can put something in the show notes. I actually use, I don't know if you had anyone on talking about the red tinted glasses that you can wear at night. All of my stuff gets filtered. I have red lights in the bathroom. My screens get filtered. I put these clips over my prescription glasses. The clips that I was holding up are red tinted. And the reason that you do that is because that allows you to get to sleep faster. It's proven to increase melatonin production. And it's because it's more in alignment with our ancestors. So the light from fire is mostly red and near infrared, mostly. So it's kind of interesting that our body doesn't seem to respond to that. It means that we probably found fire hundreds of thousands of years ago, which is fascinating. But blue light, like from the spotlight that's behind me right now for this podcast, that is going to keep you awake. So you want to block the blue, unleash the red, and that's going to allow you to get to sleep a lot faster. So as complicated as the circadian biology can get, basically here's the summary. Get outside first thing in the morning as much as you can. Get outside as much in the day as you can. You don't have to even be directly in the sunlight. Even being in a shaded area, your body's still picking up the natural light. And once it is dark, to the best of your ability, you want to block the artificial light or at least filter it to make it red, because that is going to help your body release melatonin and stay in alignment with a natural circadian rhythm. If you look up some of the biggest risk factors for people with mental health issues, it is those who don't get consistent sleep. That is one of the fastest ways to get a mental health diagnosis.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. And we'll put some things in the show notes as well for our listeners who weren't able to see what you were holding up. But this is really fascinating. Actually, I never thought of it, that the differences in coloring, the red light versus the blue light, that has these really ancient roots for us. So thanks for bringing that up. I think that's a fascinating piece of probably why mental health is also on the decline, because we do have so many screens, TV screens, tablets, phones that are around and in our face all the time. So it's actually not surprising in a sense when we think about it that way. So thank you for sharing that. And I just also want to touch, before we wrap up the episode, that Evan also has his own podcast called the Health Detective Podcast, because I feel like there's probably a lot of things that you expand on that podcast that we've only kind of scratched the surface on today in our conversation. So our listeners can pop over there also and have a listen to that podcast and dive a little bit deeper into some of the things. And for our listeners are curious now and they've picked up a lot of information and they're going, oh my goodness, I can't eat bread anymore and I can't go outside in the rain, but I should go outside because Evan said I need to pick up sunlight. How can they connect all of this? Do you have any ways available, any resources, any ways to connect with you, anything for our listeners on how they can make sense of all of this?
Yeah, for sure. It's such a hard thing. It's so easy to get stressed about this, and it's so easy to create paranoia. So the people I'm really talking to are the people that are already sick. If you feel pretty good right now and you're listening just to learn, the stress of worrying about all this stuff, that'll kill you faster than anything, probably. But if you are already sick, I think a healthy amount of stress around it is actually good because you're already feeling the effects from it. So you have to change something. In terms of the practical side, again, we talk about this all the time on the Health Detective Podcast. I appreciate you letting us shout that out. Like, we interview people who have been through these crazy health challenges, cancer, bipolar disorder, autoimmune diseases, and they share what they did. And I can tell you this, I've done over 400 interviews. We have over 400 episodes. I've probably done over 300 interviews on there. You can get so fancy with the lab testing, and I love that. I love lab testing. I do it all the time. But the bottom line is, the reason most of the people that are listening are sick, be it with physical health issues or mental health issues, is because you've been out of alignment with how we're supposed to live for too long. That's really what it comes down to. And you say, well, Evan, you were only 5 years old. How did you get sick then? That's because it's generational as well. My mom was out of alignment. She was super sick when she had me. And my grandmother, my mom's mom, she was super sick and has had diabetes for decades now. So there's a lot going on there in that family, and it kind of sets the stage for earlier disease. I believe that, at least. Here's the bottom line. If you can't afford the fancy lab tests, if you can't afford fancy blue light blocking glasses, whatever, what you want to do is think to the best of your ability, okay, what would my ancestors do? Because we were designed perfectly. So what would they do? Would they be eating this food that came packaged in a bunch of crap and with a bunch of ingredients I can't pronounce? Probably not. So maybe I should eat single ingredient foods. That's something that they might have done. Did my ancestors sit in a chair all day? Or were they on the move? Did they do a lot of activity? That's probably something they would have done. Here's another big one we don't talk about. Were my ancestors completely isolated while they worked at home all day? Both you and I got to watch this, right? Because we're on computers and we can connect on Zoom, but you and I both know it's not the same thing as connecting in person. You can feel that. It's very obvious, actually. It's kind of weird how we can feel that. Our ancestors were not solo people. They were tribal people. They were around other human beings. So you got to find a community that works for you. Even if it's not your family by blood, I'm very sorry if it's not, because that can't be easy, but you got to find your tribe. You got to find your community of people that you can go to and hang out with and feel safe with and feel like you're not being judged. Like you just want to feel comfortable with them. I think that's what we were supposed to have. And then finally, were my ancestors up at 3 a.m. scrolling on TikTok, doom scrolling, getting their dopamine all triggered and all that stuff? No, they weren't. And you don't stress about this overly. You don't have a huge amount of stress about this. What I want you to do is every month, you don't do this every day or every week, because I don't know about you, I'm human. So I screw up all the time. I make mistakes every single day. But what I do is I look back at months and I look back at years. Months makes it a little motivating because a year is a long time, but a year's also important because it helps you realize how far you've come. What I like to do, especially when I was in the beginning of this health journey, is so today is, well, we're recording this much earlier, but you might be listening to this in a various date in July of summer of 2025. So pick that date. And then a month from now in August of 2025, that's what I want you to think about. And on that date, you're going to set that in your phone, set a reminder, leave a note for yourself, whatever. You're just going to try to do a little bit better. Maybe there's one dang day in the 30 days that you get outside for sunrise. Maybe there is one dang day, a little less gluten or something like that. Ideally, it would be more, but you just start with that. And then at the end of the 30 days, that's what I ask myself. I don't want to know if I'm better than yesterday. I don't want to know if I'm better than last week. I say, was this month overall better than my previous month in terms of my habits? That's all I'm looking for. And guess what? If you do that throughout an entire year, I mean, it could be a small percentage, but you just got better 12 times because every single time has to get a little bit better. You do that for a couple of years. Well, that's 24 months that you had improvement each month. And that's why I said I was very transparent in the beginning, right? It took me 4 or 5 years before I felt 100% better. But guess what? That 4 or 5 years is going to pass anyway. So you start, you do what you can. And the only goal is this month, I'm going to try to do a little bit better than I did last month. You do that long enough, man, you'll be back in shape in no time. If you are severely sick, you asked about resources. If you're very sick, mental health, physical health wise, I would go to fdntraining.com/directory, fdntraining.com/directory, and you can actually type in by condition on there, and you can see some of our FDN practitioners. So that is the company that I host the podcast for. They are trained. They are awesome people. Yes, we can help you around the world. Really, the only place that's a little tough are certain parts of Asia. Almost everywhere else we can do labs. Certainly Europe is totally fine. All of the United States, Canada, much of South America, much of Africa. So check us out there, and we'd love to get you connected with someone that can help you out.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll be sure to link that in the show notes as well for our listeners so that they can start taking charge of their health journey and taking those little steps that you're suggesting. And you know what? It all adds up. All that consistency actually starts having a ripple effect and might take some time, but it will make a difference. So thanks for sharing that insight. And thank you for spending this time with me today. I feel like I've learned so much, and now I don't want to go eat my baguette for dinner. So I'm going to think of something different to eat. Thank you for that. And I'm going to see if that makes any changes, because I think we could all use a little bit of a boost in our health. So thank you for spending this time. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. I've truly appreciated it. And take really good care of yourself, Evan. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.